Welcome everybody to our SAEON Science Seminar for March. Today we have Michele, who's a hydrologist at the Grasslands node at SAEON, and she's going to be chatting to us a little bit about some of the hydrology work that she's doing there. So just a few little ground rules to start. Please just make sure that you are muted. And we will be recording this to put it up on the SAEON YouTube page in the next few days. And there will be a little question session at the end. So you're welcome to make use of the chat throughout the talk, or save your question for the end and you can ask it in person by just raising your hand, and we'll ask you to ask your question. So I'm going to hand it over now to Michele, who's going to be chatting about woody encroachment and is that a concern for our water yields. So thank you, Michele. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Afternoon, everyone. So as Caitlin said, I'm going to be talking about the work that we've been doing on woody encroachments. So this is work that we've started in 2019. Well, actually more, 2018 was the first time we started working on this. And it's still ongoing work that we are looking at. So in terms of the background as to why, there's quite a lot of literature from an ecology point of view looking at the expansion of woody vegetation in South Africa, or bush encroachments. And these are what I've got up here as some photos from Rephoto SA that just shows some of the woody encroachment that is being noticed across South Africa. And there's been quite a lot of work on the ecological drivers of this in terms of fire and grazing and carbon dioxide. But looking at the water connection, there hasn't been much work that has been done on that. So the relation into water is that less than 9% on average, less than 9% of our rainfall reaches our rivers. And this is because a large portion of our rainfall is partitioned to evapotranspiration. And what that means in our environment is that if you change the land cover, you change the transpiration, the soil water evaporation soil water evaporation, and that changes how the water is supplied to the system, or how much rainfall is converted into streamflow. So some of you might not be from a hydrology background. So if we just look at that, you've got rainfall that comes in. Once it hits the ground surface, it's either intercepted by the vegetation or it makes its way down to the soil surface where it infiltrates. From there, it can either move upwards through the plants as transpiration, or be lost from the soil as soil water evaporation, or could be intercepted from the lost from the water that's intercepted by the vegetation. And from the soil portion, or from the groundwater portion, it makes it into the stream flow. So if you alter this land cover, it alters how these different components are made up, or how the water is partitioned into these different components. So for example, if you have a fire which goes through a landscape, you can see that there's no more vegetation for the interception components, or for transpiration for an amount of time until that vegetation comes back. If you move from a grassland to a woody species or a tree, you're going to intercept more water than you would with the grassland. So that was just a bit of a background as to how we've been looking at this. How we set the field-based monitoring up. So our work was working from in-situ observations to look at how woody encroachments is altering the hydrological processes. So we used a paired plot design, which is where we had a baseline site, which would be a vegetation in an unencroached state. So for example, in the Drakensberg, it was the beautiful grasslands that should be there. In the Eastern Cape, it was the Albany thicket landscape, so you can see the trees, and then it was heavily encroached with acacia. And then in the the Palabora site, we had a savanna system, and that was encroached by Mopane. So this was our sort of paired design setup that we had. This afternoon, I'm just going to look at the Palabora site and the Cathedral Peak site results from there. At each of these sites, we then had a set of instrumentation. So we either used an eddy covariance system or a surface renewal system to get the evapotranspiration components. And then we had complementary measurements which went alongside that. So we had the climatic variables, we did infiltration tests, we had soil water sensors, and in Cathedral Peak we had stream flow monitoring. Whereas in Palabora we had soil matrix potential sensors. So that sort of setup was put in both the control and the treatment site at both Cathedral Peak and at Palabora. We also had the sites in the Eastern Cape, and then we've also established a site like this in Mopane, but we haven't got a long record of data from there. So if we look first to Cathedral Peak, so this is a site in the Maluti-Drakensberg. It's a high rainfall area. So it's over 1,000 millimeters of rainfall per year. So it's quite wet. It's also a high elevation. At the site we used a long-term research catchment, the Cathedral Peak research catchments, which were established in the 1940s, and they've been monitored since with a gap from 1995 until 2011. Initially, these catchments were set up to look at the influence of land treatment on water, and they were used in the initial stages to look at the influence of commercial tree species on water. Over time, it then moved on to looking at the influence of fire on water. And when looking at that, they took fire out of catchment 9, which is where the star is sitting over here. And by taking fire out, the grass transitioned to a woody species, Leucocidia. And that Leucocidia over time has become quite dense in the catchments. It wasn't a fast transition. It's been quite a slow transition to quite a dense stand of Leucocidia. There have been arson burns which have gone through the catchment, but that Leucocidia is very much the dominant vegetation across the catchment now. Whereas catchment 6 on this side, from this white star over here, catchment 6 is a grassland catchment. It's always been a grassland catchment. It's burnt biannually, and it is the sort of control catchment and always has been in the past. So it is a site that we've got the eddy covariance tower, and we've got quite an array of soil water sensors through the catchments and piezometers, stream flow measurements, and climatic variables. Whereas in catchment 9, we're using a surface renewal system, which we've calibrated against an eddy covariance system. We've got the stream flow, and we've also got soil water sensors. In terms of climates, this is just a record from both catchments. Catchment 9 is slightly warmer in terms of the maximum temperature, and then sort of a little bit cooler on the minimums. At sometimes the solar radiation is very similar, and so is the rainfall. So climatically, there were no significant differences between these two catchments. What is quite different is the land use that is there. So this is a picture of catchment 6. This black square in the middle is where the eddy covariance tower sits. So that's our fire break around it. This is a late summer picture, and the bottom image is a picture in September after the catchments have been burnt. So this is a biannual burn year, but you can also see the greenness of the catchments in summer, and then in winter that grass senesces, and essentially your transpiration is very little during that time. Catchment 9, however, is the leucocidia vegetation. So it's a short sort of bushy tree, shrubby tree. It has quite small leaves and the bark is quite papery. In summer, nice and green, the top image, and then at the bottom you can see the grass is brown, but the leucocidia remains green. And this is just a close-up image to sort of give you an idea. So there's quite a lot of the fine leaves and the bark that is happening there. So with the trees remaining evergreen, even in the dry winter months, they continue to transpire during that time, whereas the grass has stopped. One of the studies that we've looked at, so I'm just going to, this is not an order of what we did, but in terms of the processes. So looking at the interception of the leucocidia, we use stem flow gauges and through-fall troughs, as well as a microlysimeter underneath the leucocidia. And what we found is that the interception was 29% of rainfall. So 29% of the rainfall was intercepted by the leucocidia before it reached the ground and contributed to the soil water stores in this catchment relative to the grasslands. We also ran the microlysimeter in the grassland setup as well. Moving on to the ET. So what we found here is that during the summer months, so where there's clear on the graph, so this is a 30-day moving average of daily ET from 2018 to 2024, July. What we found is during the summer months, the ET from the woody vegetation, so from the leucocidia, from catchment 9, and from the grassland is quite similar. But as soon as we start going into autumn and then into winter, we get a very different response from the two catchments. The grassland, sorry, these colors are the wrong way around. Sorry. So the grassland is the gray line and the woody species is the black line. My apologies. The woody species continues to transpire, so it's higher here, where the grassland just about stops transpiring, so it's less than 1 millimeter per day for the grassland, whereas the leucocidia is sitting at around 2 millimeters per day on average over the month. The differences coming through in the spring months, we are seeing a difference when the grassland is burnt versus when the grassland is not burnt. So to look at it in a different way as an accumulation over time, again, my apologies, the colors are the wrong way around. The grassland species, as soon as you enter the winter months, the gray levels off, and that is a drop in the ET from the grassland. So this original legend is correct, and my attempt to make it easier is incorrect. So this lines here from catchment 6 are the grassland, and the black from catchment 9 is where the ET is higher. And over all the years, we've seen a consistently high ET from the woody species. Moving to the stream flow. So again, here, because of the change in the ET, there's been a change in the stream flow response. So the woody species in the black lines from catchment 9, the stream flow is much lower than from the grassland species, where the transpiration is lesser in winter. And this is particularly exaggerated. So this year down here, 2018, 2019, you can see the grassland site is also very low. It's sitting behind here. This was a very dry year. So even though it was very little water in the system, the leucocidia had still taken whatever was there and available during this wetter period here. Taking the runoff response ratio. So what I've shown here is, this is going back in time. So what we found at the site is that initially there was not a significant difference between the grassland site and the Leucocidia site. So from 1960 up until 1886, around here, this is a runoff response ratio from the grassland site in black and the Leucocidia site in grey. And they were quite similar. There was then a gap in record, and when we've started monitoring again now is where we see the difference. But it's over this time that the Leucocidia became far more dominant in the catchment. And we are seeing a big change in the runoff response ratio. So this green circle here is showing catchment 6, and that very high runoff response ratio is similar to what we have in all the other grassland catchments. So it's not anomalous. It's the same in catchment 7, catchment 6, catchment 4 and 5 combined. Whereas catchment 9, we're getting about 30% conversion of rainfall to stream flow, and catchment 6, 7, 3 and 4, 4 and 5 is upwards of 60% of the rainfalls becoming stream flow. We then looked at modeling this to look at how this would expand out into the catchments, moving down from Cathedral Peak towards Spierenkop Dam, which is lower in the catchments. And what we found is that during the winter period, there's a very marked influence on the stream flow and not a great influence during the summer months. And this is particularly evident in the dry years that we have. So on an average year in summer, you wouldn't see much difference, whereas in a dry year, you do see a change in the stream flow, and the Leucocidia are having an impact on transpiring more water and leaving less water available for stream flow. Moving to the Palabora site. So now this is a more semi-arid to arid site. So we're looking here at between 400 and 500 millimeters of rainfall per year. Here we had a cut plot where the Mopane has been removed and a control plot, which is quite dense with the Mopane. At both these sites, we used surface renewal systems because the plots are quite small, so we wanted a small fetch on the system, and the EC has the eddy covariance system has a very large fetch. We monitored ET there for 2 years, and then a portion of a year. We didn't quite get to the end. And what we found was that, yeah, the cut is the cleared, so this is the open savanna, and the black is the control, which is the Mopane site. And the dotted line here is the rainfall. So this is accumulated ET over the year. So it's presented a little bit differently. In a dry year, the cleared and the control site were very similar. The ET was the same. There's not surplus water in the system, so the grasses or the Mopane were using whatever was there, and the transpiration was capped by the amounts of soil water that was available. Moving into a wetter year, we saw a difference between the control and the cut plots. So the control plot where the Mopane was had a higher ET than the cut plots. There was slightly surplus water available, and the Mopane were able to make use of that. Again, a dry year, and we saw a very similar ET between the control and the cut plots. And work that was done after this using remote sensing and over a bigger area for a longer time period showed the same sort of trend that we saw at Cathedral Peak, where it's over time that you start to see a large influence on the ET coming from a system. And in this system, it was when you had wet years, you had higher ET from the Mopane stand than from the cleared. So you had no popping up of the system during the wetter years. So that Mopane was using up whatever was available, even in the wetter years. It wasn't as marked as what the Cathedral Peak site was. So in the Cathedral Peak site, in some of the years, we were seeing almost a halving of the stream flow that was available from the catchment relative to the grassland site. And the ET was markedly higher. if we look at the consequences of that, so the grassland biome, if that were to become encroached, so if we look at the biomes here, the bright green is our grassland biome, and it overlaps quite a bit with our strategic water source areas. And these are the areas that produce 50% of South Africa's water resources. So if a large portion of this grassland biome becomes encroached, over time, not immediately, we could see significant consequences for our already stressed water resources. So it's not going to be an immediate effect, but it would have long-term consequences as those sites became more and more encroached. And at the moment, we don't have any specific policy or legislation to deal with woody encroachment. There's policy around alien invasives and around commercial trees, but not around these indigenous woody encroached species. In Cathedral Peak, we were also fortunate enough to have a PhD student who was working on the same catchments, and he was looking at it from the context of carbon. So 60% of our national carbon stock is found in grasslands, and 89% of that stock is in the soils. So what we know is where there's greater carbon storage, there's greater soil water retention. And what Linda Dlamini showed is that in the same catchments at Cathedral Peak, the grassland stores far more soil carbon and releases less CO2. And the aggregate soil stability is greater in the grasslands than what it is in the woody encroached site. So despite the sort of international influence around planting trees and allowing woody species to come in for carbon sequestration, what Lindo showed quite clearly is that the grasslands actually had greater soil carbon storage, and they were releasing less CO2 than the woody encroached site. And that, together with the water resources work, shows that we just need to look at these systems in a nexus approach. So we need to consider the water, carbon, the energy, and the biodiversity from these systems. So in terms of the Afro-montane grasslands, biannual burning and maintaining these systems in a good condition as grasslands is crucial for carbon and water. And the sort of drive internationally to move to a more tree-dominated landscape and a woody landscape is certainly not in our best interests from a carbon and a water perspective. And we've also done work on the biodiversity components in both these landscapes. And our next sort of step is also to look at the energy components and to carry on looking at different aspects of the water and the carbon from these systems. So it was just a very brief overview of quite a long period of research on these different those woody encroached sites. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see where the questions are.
So much, Michele. It is really, really interesting. Does anybody have any questions? You're getting some claps there as well. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute and you can ask your question. Or if you'd prefer, you're welcome to make use of the chat. The question there from Duncan, you're welcome to unmute.
Thanks, Michele. It's more a comment than a question. So for me, one of the big bottom lines here is if you combine woody encroachment with alien invasive expansion within those catchments, reduced rainfall during drought, water wastage by various municipalities and other water service providers, that this is one area that exacerbates the perfect storm.
Yeah. And it's also declining water quality because a large there's large areas of degradation as well, besides the non-functioning municipal sewage treatment works. So yes, it's just adding to the storm.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Duncan. And Michelle, I see there's a question in the chat. Moletsang, would you like to ask your question, or I can do it? I see you have a few.
Yeah.
No, you can just read.
Okay. So there's a couple here. So the first one's asking, do you think bush encroaching species should be treated the same way as alien invasives? Like adding them to NEMA or something like that. And then there's the other one is looking at, do you think leucocidiae, what causes leucocidiae to remain green? Is it traits or just access to water? Oh, there's a few. And do you have any suggestions on how to control the green plant?
Okay. The first one, I don't think they should be treated the same as invasive alien plants. The seed banks are quite different, and the cause of them spreading is also quite different. The water use is, the alien invasives are higher water using than the indigenous as well. I don't quite know how they should be controlled at the moment. I think we need a separate legislation to deal with that and to look at the catchment as a whole, possibly not isolating onto the woody encroachments. We need to look at grazing management and fire management together with the woody encroachment, because they are all very strongly intertwined and linked. And added into that is then the components of the alien invasives. What we are seeing is that with the poor fire management, the poor grazing is aggravating some of the spread of the woodies and the alien invasives. In terms of the leucocidia to remain green, it would be its traits, but an ecologist would be far better to answer that question. In terms of when your last question, how to control green plants, I'm presuming you mean in terms of the evapotranspiration. So,
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Thank you. No, because you mentioned that the leucocidia remains green in all seasons, so I was thinking, how are we supposed to control it? If, because banning, I guess banning won't be an option. So because if it's green, it's going to be difficult for it to ban. So what do you suggest we can do? Because it's a problem plant, we cannot add it on NEMBA. So, and also I just wanted to ask, have you seen other encroaching species behaving the same way as leucocidia, or it's only that one?
So the Mopane dies off in winter, so that isn't remaining green. It does drop its leaves. So it's different in different sites as to what the indigenous encroacher is. In terms of your question coming back, we need to go back to why it was starting to spread in the first place and how we prevent that spread in the first place. So for example, with leucocidia, if you maintain your burning regime, a good burning regime, you'll stop it establishing at the start. And I think going back to that good land management is the way to control them.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle and Melissa. Yeah, I think it goes what you're saying there now, that land management side will hopefully try solve some of these problems, or not solve, it's a solution to some of them. Jeff, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Michelle, for an interesting presentation. Just to confirm, I think you said that your woody species at Cathedral Peak was intercepting 29% of the rainfall. just that sounded very high to me. So I presume you obviously checked that figure. And I mean, do you have any idea of what the grassland was intercepting?
So the so that's the next thing that I want to solve, Jeff. So it was the leucocidia. So that ohert has that that bark. It's that very papery bark. So the water gets into all nooks and crannies in it, and then it's got a lot of lichen on it as well, which is holding a lot of moisture. The leaves are very small, and there's quite a lot of leaf matter on the plants, so that's holding a lot of water as well. So it's a very good interceptor of water. The grassland, we couldn't. The macro lysimeter didn't quite work there, and the results that we've got, I'm not happy with. So we need to go back and try another way. The grassland has you get a lot of dew on it, and that is it's evaporating, not transpiring, evaporating before the plant starts transpiring as well. So we need to factor in that aspect as well. Yeah, so it's the grassland's very tricky to deal with because you can't put a through-fall trough underneath it. So you've got to try and weigh it, and we don't, without disturbing too much. And we can't dig a big lysimeter pit, and then you've got to keep the grass alive. It's a little bit tricky.
Actually, Matthew, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think we need to probably adjust some of the parameters that we use when we're modeling these woody species, particularly in terms of interception. Maybe just two other quick questions. For Cathedral Peak, the 6 and 9 catchments, your runoff ratios, I presume the rainfall is similar, so that didn't influence it at all, or does it? Okay.
Very similar between the two catchments.
Okay.
Statistically, not significantly different between the two catchments.
And is my understanding correct that in terms of the management regime, fire is a critical element of that to control the woody species? Okay.
So if you take fire out, the grasslands transition towards the woody leucocidia species. And what we're going to be doing next in the next phase is putting forward to allow catchment 7, which is right next to catchment 6, to transition to woody species by removing fire from that catchment. So we'll have adjacent catchments that will be part of the experimental trial. So catchment 7 already has some leucocidia in the riparian areas, so hopefully it'll spread quite quickly.
Thanks very much. Sounds like very interesting research.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Michele, again. Barney, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, and greetings to everyone. So thanks, Michele, for a great talk. So yeah, this presentation actually is very, very, very relevant, because it speaks to a number of things. And I'd like to also concur with you that from, the policy space, yeah, we currently don't have, I think, as such I'd say a comprehensive policy, which is current, so to speak. Current meaning based on, the recent current science, in the context of, bush encroachment. CARA, which is a Conservation of Agricultural Resources Act, does actually look into aspects of bush encroachment, but my sense is we actually need to review it and make it much more current and in tune with the science. We tried to do that following a study that we did. I think it was, I can't remember the year now, to explore bush encroachment, basically look at the science to inform what needs to be done in the policy space. And when it came to engagement with the Department of Agriculture, then there were these changes. So I think maybe the new financial year, when it starts, it's time that we really look into that and see, how can we mainstream the recent science, especially bringing back that awareness on the relationship between carbon and water relations, because that thing of tree planting is back again, unfortunately. And
oh no, Barney.
it's it's a battle that is tough to fight, from the inside. But so I think if maybe we do that, and perhaps we also look at the rate at which woody encroachment and woody thickening in savannas and woody encroachment into grasslands, we also need to challenge the scientific community to look into, maybe can this be pronounced as indigenous species becoming invasive? Perhaps that would make a lot of people in the policy space, especially in the influential layers, to pay attention now, to say, we've got a new problem now. We thought it was only the stuff that was introduced into the country, but it seems like our own plants are also now becoming invasive, and then that will lead to a clear national program, to look at addressing this. These were just thoughts, but I think maybe we need to again arrange for you to come and present, in like through a platform that will have policy people who are playing in this space. Thanks, Michele.
Thanks very much, Barney. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Barney. Does anyone else have any questions? I think that's maybe quite a nice place to end it, with bringing through, we've got the science and how do we actually make our understanding have some sort of an impact and lead to some sort of changes, policy, land management and that kind of stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Michele? Are you good?
Good, thank you. And thank you, everyone. And I just wanted to say, it was on the first slide, I put up the co-authors. I just want to say it was a lot of people involved in this work over the years. So yeah, it's been a great collaboration.
Thank you so much, Michele, for a very interesting talk. And thank you for everybody's questions and things. We hope to see you next month on the 3rd of April for our next seminar. And yeah, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.